I'm going to be painting the stone body of the Earth Myrmidon in this video. I'm taking Vallejo game colors, charred brown, and dark flesh tone, and I'm going to mix them together in a 50-50% mix that's going to be the first base of my dry brushing. For dry brushing, I'm using an old number 6 filbert shaped brush. That just means the tip is a little bit rounded. And when I'm trying to dry brush, I'm going to load up the brush and I'm going to wipe off most of the paint. So I just have a little bit of paint left on the brush. And I'm going to lightly stroke the brush over the surface of the rocks. I just want a little bit of paint to get onto the surface, and I want those cracks to still have the dark black primer in there, so give a little bit more contrast. I'm going to quickly mention that pellet you can see over on the left. That's one of my 2 pellets. That's the wet pellet. It's basically a plastic tray. There's a sponge in the bottom with a piece of paper on top, and you actually put some water in there that keeps the sponge wet. Makes the paper wet, not soaking wet, but you could put paint on there without it spreading out, and it really keeps the paint viable for a long time. Here's the Myrmidon's left leg with the first base coat of the brown on it. You can see it has pretty even coverage, but there's little dark bits down in the cracks. Some of them are a little bit darker brown, some of them are a little edged black. It's starting already with the first coat to give some nice contrast. Once again, I'm going to point out when you're dry brushing, you really don't want a lot of paint in that brush. So as you're wiping it, if you leave around that much, you're going to do good. And then as you put it onto the model, you'll see that it's just picking up on the highlights. And it will leave all those nice cracks and indentations dark, and it will have some variation in the color. As I'm painting large areas with the same technique, I'm going to show a little bit at regular speed, and then I'm going to fast forward through the rest of it, so you're not sitting here for an hour watching me paint the same thing over and over again. Now I'm nearly done with the first coat of the brown on the main body section. I still have the 2 arms to do, but here's a good look at what that first coat looks like covering up the stonework. Now onto the arm. Now the piece that has the 2 hands on it. Same technique, I'm just lightly stroking the paint over the hands, and I'm getting just the surface while leaving all the cracks nice and dark. And the edges of the cracks too, being the fact it's dry brushing, is going to have slightly a little brown edge to them, giving a nice blended transition into those cracks. Before we move on, I'm going to give you one nice close-up look again at those hands, and then we're going to take a closer look at the legs, just so you could see how the dry brushing looks on there, where you could see sort of the darker patches and some of the lighter patches, yet overall it's pretty much a uniform color. Now, Real Rock has a whole series of modulated colors in there, and I want to sort of emulate that. So I'm going to be adding a series of highlights, again dry brushing them all and getting a bunch of colors. This is the first one. I'm going to use some dark flesh tone, which is one of the 2 colors I mixed to get the base tone. And this is just going to lighten up a little bit of the areas. I'm just trying to hit mostly the highlights and the broad surfaces with this. Once again, I want that darker color that I mixed before, that's the base coat, to show through. So we're going to have the lighter brown, the slightly darker brown, and then slightly darker cracks. And we're going to get some really nice depth going here. As I'm applying this paint, I'm going to talk a little bit about paints. There are a bunch of different brands of paint on the market. I have a bunch of different paints. You tend to get a jar here, a jar there, depending on what you're working on. But the 2 brands I mainly use are the Vallejo Game Colors and Reaper Mini's Master Paint series. Now the Vallejo are really a thick pigment paint, and they pretty much go on in one coat, which is really nice, especially for this dry brushing stuff. The Reaper stuff, on the other hand, is really sort of thin and almost transparent, and they take lots of layers. They're really good for glazing. This is what the first highlight coat looks like. You can see there's a little bit patches of lighter, some darker stuff, and we're starting to get to see some of that form. The arm and the hands are going to get the same treatment. So it's the same thing I did on the body, just on these smaller pieces. You may also notice me touching the piece with my fingers. I posted them on those little rods and put them into the corks to avoid touching the piece so I wouldn't get finger oils on them. But sometimes I just sort of forget that they're in the post there, and I have to grab them to get them a little bit steady, especially when I'm pushing the brush over it relatively vigorously. Now it's time for the next highlight. We're going to go a little bit lighter this time. We're using Vallejo game colors, Earth and Hot Orange. We're going to mix them up again around a 50-50 mix. And now when I'm putting it on, I really just want to get the highest points. So I'm going to pick out the highest points, the stuff that's on the top surfaces, if it was standing down on a flat surface. And I'm going to start picking out individual rocks, again to get more of that color variation in there. Here's how it looks on that first leg. You could see the difference between that forward leg and the backwards leg, and then the head and the arm, how much more depth and brightness there is. So now I'm going to do the rest of the figure. This next highlight's sort of a companion to that last highlight. It's a hot orange again and khaki, both of them Vallejo game color. Once again mixed around 50-50, but this time I'm just going to get the very top highlights of the surfaces, and I'm not going to cover the whole legs, but just sort of the knees and then the top of the thighs, and then maybe I'll pick out a rock or two, just again to get some more variation in those rock shades. When working in sub-assemblies, I have to keep remembering that there are other parts to paint too, so as I finish one piece, there's other parts that I have to do the same process to. This is how the arm turned out. Again, you could see a lot of variation in that rock color. Next up, I'm going to put a little bit of spot washes here and there of Vallejo smoke. The stuff's a wonder project. I'll talk a lot more about it when I start tarnishing up the armor in the next video. But here you could see me sort of dabbling, just little spots of this. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get little dark patches and again break up those color areas and the little divots and stuff on the rocks. I sort of want to get those filled in again. This is a really great product. It dries with beautiful edges and it has a real subtle effect. When we're finished with this, you'll be able to see sort of how this really adds even more depth to this rock. Once again, we're going to be adding a little bit more color variation, this time with Parasite Brown. We're just going to hit one or two little rocks here to get some of them a little bit more orangey to stand out from the rest of them. You may also notice as I'm painting this that that Vallejo smoke that we put on earlier has left a really glossy coat. You can see all the little shiny highlights and stuff. That's not a problem. When we're done with all this, we're going to be spraying it with a dull coat, and that'll take away that shine and unify all that color together. Alright people, we finally arrived. This is going to be the last highlight. This is just desert yellow. And what I want to do is I just want to peek some of the edges of those upper rocks. So I don't want to really do that much of the faces, but I just want to get a little color variation of this brighter yellow going just as light hits those little speculars there. I'm going to add a little bit more of this brighter yellow along the backs of the legs. The backs of the legs are covered with ivy, which I'm going to be painting green later on. And I want a little bit brighter area because I'm going to be making the outlines of that ivy a little bit darker, and I really want it to help it pop it a little bit more. So that's what I'm doing here. Here's the rock all finished up. Now, this is great for now. When I get everything else in, the base, the ivy, the armor, and everything else is finished, I'm going to go back, I'm going to add just some extra highlights on here to help pop it. But at this stage, I'm not sure what those highlights are going to really need to be. The armor comes next. Now, all those highlights and stuff and the dry brushing got the edges of the armor really messy. So I'm taking some black primer. This time it's Reaper. It doesn't really matter. The Reaper primer, the Vallejo primer is all really nice and thick. And what I'm doing is I'm just cleaning up from over the dry brushing I did on the armor, so I have a nice black base for when I put the silver on, that it really doesn't have that brown and stuff hinting through the edges. Now, whenever painting armor and metals, I really want a black underneath it instead of a white. The metal paints, they actually have little bits of ground metal in them called flake. And the flake seems to just set up really nice over black. A lot of people do black and then just wash the metallic over it so the black shows through. But even if the black doesn't show through, the paint is just going to be much brighter. Unlike normal colors. When you're painting normal colors over black, they tend to become desaturated and go down. They need multiple coats. But metallic paints seem to pop a little bit better on black. So I really want to make sure that this black coat is nice and clean to accept my metal paint. And here he is, ready for his coat of metal paint.